Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Greg Rowan. I'm the president of Heritage Auctions, and on behalf of the 350 worldwide members of the Heritage family, I would like to welcome you tonight and thank you for coming as we start our first auction of the 2010 year. For those of you who are watching online, this is our first auction, this is our first presentation of Second Tuesdays. This is our first presentation of Second Tuesdays at Slocum that we are streaming live on our website, ha.com, so that all of the 500,000 members in 181 countries that are members of ha.com can watch tonight's presentation. So we welcome you, and we are glad that you are with us as well. For those of you who are watching from someplace other than here in our sale room in Dallas, Texas, I'm pleased to announce that we are opening next month a sale room in Los Angeles, located on Olympic Boulevard in Beverly Hills. That'll be open in mid-February, and if you're in Southern California, we hope that you can stop by and join us. And we will also be opening offices in New York City coming this summer. So we hope to have more announcements about that later on. I actually just returned this past weekend from a week of auctions. We had one auction in New York City and one in Florida last week, and I am pleased to report that the auction market for the categories that we are in seems alive and very well. Our sales in auctions last week alone, just last week, were $53 million, with over 90% of the lots offered being sold. So the economy may not be fabulous, but people decided that they would rather have those great collectibles that we were auctioning last week than the $53 million in cash that they had sitting in the bank. And I think that's a great testament to the strength of very truly desirable high-end items in the marketplace today. In the room, as you look around here, you will see some interesting pictures on the wall. This is in the category of illustration art. Heritage is currently selling an illustration art collection for benefit of the American Red Cross. These are things that have been donated to the American Red Cross in Washington, D.C., that they have donated to us so that they can continue their good works with the proceeds from the sale of these items. This auction is going to take place in February, and in addition to the collection of the American Red Cross, it also includes items from the $20 million estate of Charles Martinetti, who we are selling over about a 2-year period of time, which is the best of American illustration art. So you will note the Red Cross symbol that's on a number of the pieces, and there's also a lot of fabulous illustration art from the Martinetti estate. If you are unfamiliar with Heritage, Heritage is the third largest auction house in the world. We have 26 different categories, and I would invite you to have a look at our website at ha.com to see if there's a category that is of interest to you. Everything from rare coins to fine art to jewelry, rare books, manuscripts, Americana, sports collectibles. Please have a look and contact us if you would be interested in participating in those auctions, either as a consignor or as a buyer. I am very pleased that Julie Cronick is here with us tonight. Mr. Stanley and Linda Marcus have been friends for, the late Mr. Stanley and Linda Marcus have been friends for many years, and Linda had tried to be here tonight, but she is unavoidably out of the country. She sends her best. And for those of you who had the opportunity to know Mr. Stanley or Linda while he was collecting and while he was buying for himself and for the Neiman Marcus art collection, which Julie is going to speak about, you know that not only did the man have impeccable taste in everything he did in his life, that also extended to the art that he collected for the Neiman's corporate collection. We have been very privileged at Heritage to sell a number of objects for other corporate collections. We're not selling anything for Neiman's corporate collection, but we have been very privileged to sell on a local basis things for 7-Eleven and on a national basis for Random House and for AOL Time Warner. So we're very, very pleased to have our association with curators from corporate art collections and for our museum services department and for our corporate services department to be able to assist them in any way. I will now turn over the microphone to our featured speaker. You've all been lovely as I've rambled on here. Julie Cronick has been the corporate curator for Neiman Marcus for the last 17 years. Prior to that, she was associated with the Whitney Museum in New York. And it is my pleasure to welcome Julie Cronick to Second Tuesdays at Slocum as we begin our new year. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I just want to thank everyone here at Heritage Auction for inviting me to come and talk to you all tonight. It is a pleasure to become connected with people who also share the same passion and interest for fine art as I do. And it's so nice to meet people who are interested in getting groups like yourselves. As Greg mentioned, I have been working for the Neiman Marcus collection now for about 17 years. And as you can imagine, it's something that's really become near and dear to my heart. And it gives me no greater pleasure than to speak about this collection, about its history, and about what it's become. So again, thank you all for having me here. Tonight can you hear me okay? Am I fading in and out? Tonight I thought I would talk a little bit about the background of the collection, its history, and the philosophy behind the collection. And then I'd like to show you some images of some of the more important pieces that we have in this collection. And then I'd like to take a few moments to show you some of our more recent acquisitions that we've purchased, and to talk to you a little bit about what our current focus has become these past 10 to 12 years. And share some of those images with you as well. So with that, how did it all begin? Now, for those of you who've grown up in Dallas or who've lived here for quite some time, some of this information will be a little bit familiar to you, so please bear with me. Neiman Marcus was founded back in 1907 by Herbert Marcus and Carrie Neiman. And that was the father and the aunt of Stanley Marcus. And although the store had been around for quite some time, and it was his father and his aunt who founded it, it was really Stanley Marcus who put the name Neiman Marcus on the map. It was Mr. Stanley who really brought Neiman Marcus to national and international attention. And it was, of course, Stanley Marcus who had the knowledge, the perspective, and the foresight. And it was he who really made it his mission to bring culture and a high level of taste to not only the stores, but to the community as well. Mr. Stanley had a wonderful philosophy about fine art. He truly believed that art enhanced the quality of everyone's life. And as many of you may know, he had a private collection of his own, and he saw how art had really enriched the quality of his life over the years. And he found that by placing art in the stores, it was a wonderful way to enrich his customers' experience and offer them something very different, educational, cultural, something that they might not otherwise be exposed to. And in one of his books, he commented, "Collecting has brought me continuous joy and satisfaction, leading me to rich and varied experiences. Collecting has meant much more than the mere collecting of things. It has brought knowledge about the objects I've collected, their use, the motivations of the people who made or used them, and the history of the times in which they were used." Now, when Mr. Marcus was at the helm of the stores, he was the sole buyer of the fine art. And he traveled extensively in countries all over the world, and he was always searching for unique and one-of-a-kind merchandise to place in the stores for sale. And when he went on these extensive travels and buying trips, he always kept his eyes open for interesting art pieces as well. And oftentimes he would buy a work for his own private collection, and then he would buy additional pieces from that artist or from that gallery to place in the stores. And basically he bought what he liked. So over time, what we've collected is quite a large collection that really began to grow and to flourish. Now, as many of you may also know, Mr. Marcus had very eclectic taste. He had an appreciation for all types of fine art, whether it was artists from various cultures, artwork that dated centuries ago, up to contemporary art, and also work of all different mediums. So what we have in this collection is everything from textiles to sculpture painting, works on paper, mixed media pieces, and even limited edition prints. So there really is quite a range there. And Mr. Marcus basically bought what moved him. He bought pieces whether or not he had a particular location in mind. And he stated in one of his books, "Perhaps I didn't discipline myself enough by concentrating in a single field, but I found I had a roving eye for beauty that was stimulated by the diversity of artistic expression. This Catholic taste served me well in my business in developing unique merchandise and educating customers on the subtleties of taste and of quality." So if you take Mr. Marcus's eclectic taste and couple that with his extensive travels, what resulted is this very vast collection that we now own. And when I first started with the company back 17 years ago, I found the collection quite overwhelming in its entirety. There are so many wonderful pieces in this collection, but there are so many works that are completely unrelated to one another. And I found it very difficult to get my hands around this collection and understand it in a meaningful way. So I found, at least for my purposes, it was best to generalize and divide this collection into two large categories. And for the discussion tonight, I will do so as well. Currently, we have approximately 2,500 pieces in this collection. And that's really quite a large number, but it's very deceiving because it's everything from a very large-scale sculpture that may stand outside of a store to a very small print that may hang in a back hallway. So there really is quite a range there. I'm very proud to say that all of those 2,500 works are dispersed throughout our 41 existing stores. We do not have a large warehouse where a lot of the work is being held, and the majority of the work is not in the corporate and the executive offices, but it's rather out there in our stores on view for all of our customers and for all of our associates to enjoy and to appreciate. So I think of the collection as divided into two parts, that which is ethnic art and then the modern and contemporary work. And the way that I define the ethnic category is works by artists from various cultures. Some of this work is very old, dating back centuries, and then there's a lot of 20th century work as well. And I'm just going to show you a few slides because this part of the collection really represents only about 10 to 15% of this entire collection, and there's so much more to share with you. But just to give you a few examples of some of these pieces, a few textiles. This is one of many Indonesian pieces that we own. This is a megamendung batik, and like so many of our textiles, it was used for some type of ceremonial purposes. This was a sarong worn by royalty. It's not a very old piece from the 1930s, but it's a particularly rare design, I was told, and we purchased this piece back in the early 90s, and it's in our Beverly Hills store. Here we have one of many Indian works, a cashmere shawl, again, used for some form of ritual purposes, a 20th century work, and like so many of the Indian pieces that we have in this collection, this is cloth with a lot of intricate gold thread running through it. So a very elaborate, large-scale work, and this is in our downtown Dallas store. Here we have another Indian work, a fulkari, very different from the last piece that I showed you, but very vibrant in color, a 20th century work, and this hangs in our Palo Alto location. Here we have a Portuguese dowry embroidery, a very old piece dating back to the 1700s, and this particular piece was purchased actually from a dealer locally, and this particular piece is housed in Beverly Hills. And like all of our other textiles, they're all framed up very nicely so they can be showcased in the most proper way. Here we have a couple images of several Cuba cloths that we have in the collection. And if you're not familiar with the African Cuba cloths, they're really quite incredible pieces to me because they look as if they're made of fabric, but they're actually made of raffia or grass that has been tightly woven together to create these wonderful modern geometric pieces. And these two images, one is shown in the Washington store, and the other is in our San Francisco location. But we have several in the collection. Now I wanted to show you a few images of our Mola textiles. And these were textiles that Stanley Marcus was very, very fond of. And I know that for a fact because we have numerous upon numerous upon numerous textiles of these molas in our collection. And these are from the Cuna Indians from the San Blas Islands in Panama. And typical of these works, they are appliqued with hand stitching, very simplistic in nature, and usually the subject matter were of birds, plants, animals. And after owning several of these pieces, Stanley Marcus went back to these people and commissioned them to do additional works interpreting the signs of the zodiac. And as many of you know, we have our Zodiac restaurant at our downtown Dallas store, but at one time, all of our other restaurants in the stores were named the Zodiac, and a lot of these molas hung in those locations. Since then, we've changed the name of all of our restaurants besides the one in downtown, and so since then, some of these pieces have been dispersed to other locations. Here we have the work of Osvaldo Vitari, not a very old work at all. This is an artist from Ecuador, and he's very well known for his assemblage pieces, taking like items and placing them together in some type of collage format. They're really delightful works, and it's a little bit dark in the slide, but really wonderful pieces. And we own 3 that are very similar to this piece I show you here, and this one is in our downtown Dallas location. Now to say a few words about some of the ethnic sculpture that we own. As with the textiles, we have 20th century sculpture that falls in this category, and then we also have pieces that are very old. This is an angel figure from Thailand, and this dates back to the 18th century. It looks as if it's made of stone, but it's actually of polychrome wood with jewels embedded in it. And you can imagine it's an 18th century piece, how elaborate it must have been in the day. And this particular work was purchased back in the 60s, and it's been in the Fort Worth store, I believe, since then, and very fitting that it stands outside of our precious jewelry department. Several of our ethnic sculptures are more tribal in nature, and this is one of those examples. This is a work from New Guinea, a war shield, typical of this tribal face, and this dates to 20th century, and this can be viewed in our men's department in the downtown store as well. Here we have one of several masks that we have from Africa. This is from the Abron tribe off the Ivory Coast of Africa, and it's a 20th century piece, polychrome wood, but you can see that the colors are still so vivid. And this mask is about 7 feet high, so it's really quite a large-scale work, and this has been in our Houston Galleria store for many years, and it really has quite a presence there. Another work from Africa, but this is from the Sanufo tribe, a very different type of piece. This is an African fire spitter mask, and it dates back to the 19th century. So a very old work, and this is also in our Houston Galleria store. Here we have a Nigerian figurative mask, and I show you this piece because this is probably one of Mr. Stanley's favorite pieces. It's a 20th century work, but this piece used to be in his executive office at the downtown store. And there are numerous photographs of Mr. Stanley in his office beside his dear friend here, the Nigerian one. And I know he was very fond of it, and this piece still exists in the Dallas store. Here we have a Chinese Buddha figure. This dates back to the 15th century Ming Dynasty, and this is probably the oldest piece that we have in the collection. A wonderful piece, very monumental, made of bronze, and this is on the 2nd floor in the downtown store. And it always amazes me when I walk by a piece such as this, at how accessible it is to everyone at the store. You know, this is a piece that's really so valuable, and it's of museum quality. And here it is out in the store on the selling floor for everyone to view and to appreciated. Really quite incredible. And that is all I'll really say about the ethnic work, because as I mentioned, it's such a very small part of the whole entire collection, and I really wanted to give most attention to the modern and the contemporary work that we own. Now, within this modern and contemporary category, we have artists who are very well established, very recognizable names, and then we have much younger artists, more emerging artists who are in local or regional areas where we've been opening stores. And I'll speak about that group in just a moment. But now I wanted to mention some of the more established artists whose names you will probably recognize. And one deserves special attention, and that is our Alexander Calder mobile. And the two black and white images show this Calder as it was first installed in the very first Neiman Marcus location. And there's Alexander Calder himself. This particular piece was by Stanley Marcus directly from Calder back in 1951. And because this was the first major piece that was purchased for one of the stores, we at the company say that that's when the collection officially started, back in 1951. This particular work is about 11 feet high, and the span of it is about 11 feet around. So it is a quite large piece, very monumental. If you're familiar with Calder's work, it's typical of his mobiles, typical of the primary color palette, and just a really exceptional work. And it's one that is probably our most prized piece in the collection, something that we all at Neiman Marcus love to talk about, to brag about, and we're very fortunate to have this work. But I must say that stories that have been passed down through the years show that we didn't always appreciate this work so much. Most of us didn't even know what it was. And Mr. Marcus recalls in his biography, Minding the Store, when I asked Mr. Calder to design a large mobile for Neiman's first suburban store, it was an object of great curiosity, being the first Calder hung permanently in Dallas. An elderly customer was reported to have gazed at it shortly after it was suspended and remarked, "If they think they're going to catch flies with that thing, they're crazy." Well, Mr. Marcus probably got a large chuckle out of that, but nevertheless, he was ever so proud to have this piece in his collection, and especially have it in Dallas, being the first Calder exhibited there. Now, not long after that comment was made, in another situation, it was another customer who had more favorable remarks to make about the piece. She actually was quite enamored by the work, didn't realize that it was a work of fine art, or even that it was a Calder. But she was quite interested, and she expressed this to her salesperson, and she said, "You know, I love that piece, and I would even buy it from you. I want to have that piece." And the salesperson, ever wanting to please her very best customer, said, "I think that's just a visual display prop. I'm sure we can just take that piece down and give it to you. And there would be no need to charge you for that." And luckily, someone overheard that conversation and set the story straight immediately, explaining what an important work of art this was, who Alexander Calder was, and explained that under no circumstances would this piece ever be sold, even to one of our very best customers. So not long after that, believe it or not, there was another interesting choice words by one of our store managers when the Calder was hanging in yet another location. And our store manager actually liked this piece of art. He didn't know who Calder was, but he got a little tired of the color palette, and he felt that maybe we should take this piece down and repaint it, maybe a new color for the trends of the new season. So once again, the painter that he hired to do this job immediately recognized this piece and put a stop to that immediately. Once again, another cultural crisis averted. So our poor Calder has been through a great deal with us, but we certainly have learned our lesson at Neiman Marcus, and it's something that we truly are very proud to own. It's a spectacular piece, and if you do ever get to the Beverly Hills store, it's certainly worth making a stop and viewing this piece. Other works that share company with our Calder Here is the work of the British artist Terry Frost. This was an artist who Stanley Marcus was very fond of, and he is a very well-known British abstractionist back from the 1950s. And his work is characteristic of taking elements in nature and reducing them to their most minimalist forms, as he's done here. This is a spectacular, beautiful painting. It's actually one of my favorites, and it hangs in the downtown Dallas store. Here we have a very large-scale sculpture. This is the work of Alexander Lieberman. And for those of you who aren't familiar with his work, he is very well known for his sculptures that usually painted in red, and he often creates his abstractions by using different combinations of these interconnecting loops of steel. And this large-scale piece was commissioned back when our Northbrook, Illinois store opened in '76, and it's been there ever since. It's really become a landmark for that store, and customers in that community truly do enjoy it and even take ownership of it as well. Here we have the work of Pablo Picasso, and this is typical of some of his tribal figures with the angular face and the almond-shaped eyes. This is actually a ceramic multiple, and while of course it's very important to have a Picasso in our collection, I will say that it's not the most important piece that we do own. It was purchased back in the late 60s, and it's a multiple, as I said. Here are a few examples of a large group of works that we own by the artist Marcel Verte. And I wanted to show you these pieces because they are certainly wonderful paintings, really charming portraits in their own right. But there's a story that goes along with these pieces that illustrates the degree to which Stanley Marcus went to really engage his customers, and not only to allow them to appreciate the work, but to engage them in the collecting process as well. And the story is that years ago, Stanley Marcus was on one of his buying trips to New York, and on the airplane, he was reading an article or a review from this gallery exhibition of these 20-some-odd paintings by Marcel Verte, and they were called imaginary portraits. And they were all of very famous people, as the artist depicted them as they might have looked as small children. So here you see Greta Garbo, Pablo Picasso, and Winston Churchill. And he was quite intrigued by this article. So the story says that he went directly from the airport to the gallery and bought all of these paintings in one fell swoop. And they hung at the downtown store for quite some time. And after a few months, Verte contacted Mr. Marcus and said, I'm thrilled that you're enjoying all of these pieces, but as you know, one of these pieces, all of these portraits were of very well-known people, but there was one portrait in that suite that he did of his wife, Dora, and he said, I really would like that piece back. I would like to buy it back from you. And Mr. Marcus said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sell it back to you. This collection has really meant a lot to me, and it's gaining so much appreciation and attention in our store. I would do nothing to separate this work. So conversations went back and forth, and Verte must have put a little pressure on Mr. Stanley, because finally he relented, and he said, I won't sell it back to you, but I will give you that portrait back, and in return I would like to commission you to do an additional portrait, the subject of whom I will choose. And this is where Mr. Marcus decided to make this a wonderful opportunity. And in only his style, he held a very elegant cocktail party at the downtown store, and all of these paintings were featured around this party. And everyone who came to the party could cast their vote for who they thought the next subject of the next portrait should be. Well, Dwight Eisenhower was president at the time, and that is who they chose. So here we have Dwight Eisenhower at age 1. And I really find that a charming story because it so very well illustrates the degree that Stanley Marcus went to engage his customers. And I will say to all of you who are collectors that the personal experience that goes with the collecting is really what makes it so meaningful. And I think that Mr. Marcus understood that so well and he felt like if he could just engage his customers in that way as well and make them part of the collecting process, that he would certainly be serving his mission. So just to continue, here we have a large-scale painting by the artist Frank Stella. And for those of you who know much of his current work, it's very active, very expressive, but his work back in the 70s was very typically, such as this example, very simplistic, geometric in nature. And this is a very large-scale work that hangs in our Fort Worth store and has so for many years. Here we have the work of Jean Dubuffet. And for those of you who know Dubuffet's work, this is typical of his black and white, very fragmented, very abstracted rendition of the figure. And much of his work are freestanding sculptures, but this particular work is a wall sculpture. It's about 4 feet wide, and this hangs in our Beverly Hills store. And I would say, aside from the Calder, this is probably our next most important work that we own. So when you're at the Beverly Hills store admiring our Calder, you can also take a look at our Dubuffet as well. Here we have a work by the artist Gene Davis. Gene Davis was very well known amongst a group of Washington, D.C. painters back in the 70s, minimalist, abstractionist. Gene Davis was very well known for his vertical bands of color. And this particular piece is about 11 or 12 feet wide, and it hangs in our downtown Dallas store. But this actually is only a model or a maquette for a much greater, larger piece that hangs in our Washington, D.C. store. We have on the first floor of that store a balance area which is quite large, and he was commissioned by Stanley Marcus to do a work that was, I believe it's about 13 feet high by 50 feet wide, so quite enormous. And what's so spectacular about that is that Gene Davis is so well regarded and respected in that area in D.C., and the fact that we have such a monumental work hanging in that store is really something quite special. Now I want to move forward to a much more contemporary work. Most of you are probably familiar with the artist Dale Chihuly. He is, of course, the one who brought glass blowing from a craft to the level of fine art. His work is very lucrative, and his work has been in so many different museum and private collections around the world. When we opened our Paramus, New Jersey store back in the mid-90s, we had a very unusual situation where we had this exterior window that curved around the front of the store. And most all of our windows are always reserved for fashion. We never place art in our windows. But this was going to be a permanent exhibition space that they were giving to us. And so we made the contact with Dale Chihuly, and of course we're very excited to see what he would come up with this very unusual space. And after a few months, he came back to us with about 6 or 7 very beautiful, singular, hand-blown glass vessels that were all resting on their individual white pedestals, sort of a perfect exhibition for a gallery. And we hated to sound ungrateful, but we really weren't excited about the work because this was such a unique space. And so we declined that commission and asked him if he would go back to the drawing board and see what he could do to really come up with something spectacular. And that is just what he did. And just to describe what you're looking at here, he created several of these very large-scale globes or spheres of hand-blown glass, all very rich in saturated color, and they all rest on a bed of crushed clear glass. And then in the background, you see these very exciting paintings on paper which he's done. And most of his paintings are very expressive, splatters of paint, almost sloppy, if you will, but they're renditions of some of his vessel-like forms, and you can see that with the circular shapes. So we have all of these drawings in the background of this wonderful sculptural work, and this piece is absolutely dynamic. It's spectacular in the evening, and it's just as dynamic during the daytime, and he really gave us so much more than we could have ever asked for, and certainly so much more than we could have ever afforded. So it's something that's truly a spectacular piece in this collection. And this, again, is in our Paramus, New Jersey, or outside of the Paramus, New Jersey store. Well, I can't talk about the contemporary work of established artists without mentioning our large print collection. We have so many prints. This particular one is by the British artist Howard Hodgkin, and this is typical of his two-dimensional work. This piece was purchased back in the early 80s, and it is in our Palo Alto store. But most of our limited edition prints were purchased in the 90s when we were doing a lot of expansion. Neiman Marcus was opening several stores, at least one or two per year, and in addition, we were undergoing some major remodels. So we had a lot of opportunities to buy a lot of work, and we had a lot of spaces for various series of smaller pieces. And so we decided that this would be a wonderful opportunity to buy limited edition prints by very well-known artists. It was a way to get some of these big names into our collection in a very affordable manner. And just to show you a few different slides, here we have two of several Lichtensteins that we own. And the piece on the left is in our Paramus store, and the piece on the right is actually quite a large-scale work. It's about 5 by 6 feet, which is very unusual for a limited edition. And this piece was originally in our White Plains store and has since been recently relocated to our Atlanta location. But typical of Lichtenstein's later abstract work, you can see the subtleties of the Ben-Day dots, the primary colors and the stripes that are indicative of his work. Here we have a large-scale work by Jim Dine, typical of his bathrobe series, and this work is in our Beverly Hills store. Here we have one of several Sol LeWitts that we have in the collection, and what's unique about his work is he usually works in etching and aqua tint, and I find this type of printmaking truly amazing because these works look as if they are watercolors, but they're limited editions. So again, really amazing work. There are so many other prints that I could show you in this collection, but just to name a few, we have works by Jean Cocteau, David Hockney, Larry Rivers, Robert Indiana, Andy Warhol, Donald Sultan, and Ross Bleckner. And the list goes on and on. Well, now I want to turn and talk a little bit about what our current focus has been these past 10 to 12 years. We have been concentrating on artists who are working in a non-representational, abstract style, and all of these artists are local or regional to the projects that we're working on. So for example, last fall we opened a store out in Bellevue, which is just outside of Seattle, and about 95% of all of that work was by artists who were residing in that area. And this program has been quite successful for us because it's really been a nice way for us to connect with different communities. And of course for me, it's been really exciting because I've found so many wonderful artists doing very sophisticated, what I feel is very valid work, and work that we're honored to have in this collection. And like so many other people, I used to think that it was New York and LA and Chicago. Those were the places that I needed to go to see the latest and the greatest. But truly, there are great artists doing interesting work everywhere. It's just a matter of going out into those communities and finding them. And that's what we have made our mission the past several years. So I just wanted to show you a few examples. Here we have the work of Paolo Solari. And this elderly artist was very well known at the time for making these small little wind chimes that were probably 1 to 2 inches high. And we approached him and asked him if he would consider doing a very monumental, large-scale wind chime piece for our Scottsdale store. He certainly is a very recognizable name in that community, and this was clearly the largest piece that he had ever taken on. And it's a beautiful work. We have an unusual space for that store. It's like a breezeway or entryway before you get into the store. And as the door opens and closes and there's a subtle breeze, you get this slight movement of these wind chimes and this wonderful sound. So it's really a spectacular piece, and it has been so well regarded by the community there. Here we have the work of a more emerging artist, the LA artist Guy Dill. And in our Beverly Hills, or outside of our Beverly Hills store, we had sort of a big eyesore at the valet entrance. And in the Beverly Hills store, everyone uses the valet entrance. So it was very important that we find a piece that would be fitting for that area. And we were very fortunate to find this existing work by Guy Dill. This is characteristic of his large-scale steel pieces, very minimal, geometric, and again, very honored to have his work in the collection. Just to turn to painting, here we have the work of the Atlanta artist Rainier O Shah. And I was first introduced to her work when we were doing a major remodel for our Atlanta store. But we have since purchased her work also for our Charlotte location and also San Francisco and our downtown store. And I find her work to be quite interesting. She works in encaustic, which is a medium that is melted wax mixed with pigment. So she gets these incredible surfaces and layer upon layer. Her work is really quite amazing, and she's starting to get national attention as well. Here we have the work of Sous Morales, and I certainly wouldn't call this artist an emerging artist, but he does have a lot of ties to Texas, so it's one of those artists. Wasn't really sure what category to place him in, but when we opened our Willow Bend store out here in Plano, we had the rare opportunity to purchase a large-scale monumental work by this artist. Typical of his style, he works in granite, often using both the rough edges of the stone and then the smooth, polished side as well. And here you see an angle from the rough side, but a wonderful, magnificent piece. And this is on the second floor in Willow Bend. Here we have the two-dimensional work of Lance Lesher, and this is an Austin-based artist. And I guess a few years back, we were doing a lot of different projects in Texas, which was very exciting for me. We opened a store in Austin, one in San Antonio, and then we did a major remodel in our Houston Galleria store. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me to finally seek out artists who were sort of in our own backyard. And what's interesting about Lesher's work is that he was fascinated by books. Very old books, repurposed books, recycled books, any kind of material that he could get, old magazines as well. And he cut everything from the binding to individual words or sentences, illustration, whatever it was, to make these wonderful collages that almost look like quilts. And I'm very sorry that I don't have a close-up to show you because his work is really quite spectacular. We have a couple pieces in our Willow Bend store, and this particular work is in Austin, and we also have his work in Houston and San Antonio as well. Here we have the work of a younger artist, Lynn Emery, and we commissioned her to do this large-scale piece outside of our Short Hills, New Jersey store. And she works in steel, and this is actually a kinetic piece. So as the wind blows, these petals or leaves move ever so slightly, and it really becomes a very elegant piece with its own personality. Here we have a painting by the Boston artist Reese Inman, and we were introduced to her work when we opened the Natick, Massachusetts store a couple years ago. And Reese is certainly well known in her community, but is getting more attention. She works, this particular piece is quite large. It's about 5 by 7.5 feet, quite large. But her work is very much influenced, as you can see, by computer imaging, digital imaging, and pixelated imagery. So she does a lot of work on the computer, and then she takes her research and her resources and transforms them into these beautiful abstract paintings. Again, very exciting work and one that we're proud to have in this collection. Here we have the work of the late artist Richard Beckman, and this particular piece is in wood. And we came upon this artist years ago when we opened our Palm Beach store. We were opening a lot of Florida stores at the time, so I was really delving into various areas of Florida and met a lot of different artists. But there was a particular existing piece by Beckman that was very similar to this spiral piece, but very small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. And we purchased that piece when we opened our Palm Beach store. And we quite enjoyed it. And then a couple of years later, we were to open our Tampa store. And Beckman was a professor of sculpture at the University of Tampa. So we decided that it would certainly be a good idea for us to go and meet with him. So, of course, we gave him the challenge of doing a very similar coil piece, but could he please make it 5 times bigger? Well, of course, he initially said, I'm sorry and no thank you, but we pressed him a little bit, and he explained to us how difficult it would be, because he works in wood, to get these wonderful, exacting circular patterns in a very smooth technique, how he would achieve this in wood. And the engineering that went into this piece is really quite incredible. And I can say that he is one of those artists who I've never seen work harder to accomplish an end result. And this piece is something that we're so proud to have in the collection. And I think he was probably as surprised and happily astounded as we were to see the outcome of this work. And he passed away a few years ago, so that makes this piece so much more of a meaningful one to have in this collection. Well, those are all of the images that I have to show you tonight, and believe me, I have barely scratched the surface of what we have. But I hope that this does give you a good idea of the breadth of this collection and how far-reaching it really is. And I hope this will encourage you as you travel around the country and hopefully have the opportunity to visit some of our other stores, that you will take notice of some of these wonderful pieces that we have. And, you know, as I've always said, this collection is such an important part of the heritage of Neiman Marcus. It's something that we want you to enjoy and take advantage of in the same way that we have for all of these years. So thank you. Can I answer any questions for anyone?
What year did you start working yourself for Neiman?
Well, I started actually back in 1990 just as a private consultant for them. And I was given this job, and they said, we can hire you for 5 months. And after about a year and a half, they decided to make this a permanent position and give me this curatorial position, and that's where I've been ever since. So.
Did Stanley Marcus eventually see active purchases of art, or he left the company sometime prior to his death?
He sold the company many years before, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact date. It may have been like in the early 80s or something. I don't have that exact date, but he did sell the company, and when he sold the company, the art that was in those stores was sold with it. So that became ours. And then we have purchased. And of course, he was always a wonderful advisor to all of us, and we loved to get his feedback when he would visit some of our new stores, but he wasn't part of the selection process after that.
So much of this later work that we have seen, that we've enjoyed, are pieces that you have acquired very directly for the company. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Do you select the pieces yourself, or is it done by committee? And if so, who is on the committee?
Well, basically, I select the pieces, and then I have someone who I work for, who I kind of come up with an art plan, so to speak. And I do a lot of research when we're opening a new store. So I start with the architectural plans, and at the same time, I'm researching artists in these various communities and sort of narrowing it down. And the gentleman who I've worked with now for about 15 years, it's amazing how we have very similar tastes, and that always helps in the decision-making process. When we do go to various artist studios and we're not so enamored with the work, we tell them that there is a very large committee that makes these decisions. Oh.
Are the pieces used in the marketing, in addition to being pieces in the store? Are they part of the catalogs or decorative? Or
They're really not, and I do my best to really keep them separate. I will tell you that our advertising department does such a great job in what they do, and their marketing work and their advertising work is really a fine art all its own. And so we really try to keep the artwork as separate as possible because we really just want to make it clear that we want the art to really stand on its own. And we don't want it to be a backdrop for the fashion or anything like that. And that's why also, a lot of artists will show us work of wonderful paintings of shoes or dresses, and we really shy away from that because we want the art to really stand on its own integrity and be completely unrelated to what else is going on in the store. Anyone else? Yes?
Do you have any particular pieces in Honolulu?
Actually, that's probably, if someone asked me what my favorite store was, I would say it was our store on Oahu. That particular collection was really what started this whole idea of representing local artists. And when we started with that store, we were very fearful that I was going to get bombarded by people who were showing paintings of dolphins and oceans and beaches and everything you think of with Hawaii. But on our first trip to Hawaii, actually, there's a wonderful contemporary museum there, and they were having a show of all Hawaii-based artists who were working in a non-representational abstract style. And there was all of my work right there in that one exhibit. And we met with the director, and literally our entire trip turned around, and we went to all the different islands visiting these various artists. And we found some absolutely spectacular work, people who were from Japanese origin to transplants who had moved to Hawaii, a great range of people, and we have a great contemporary collection there. It's absolutely fabulous, I must say.
Yes, about 10 or 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to hear Stanley Marcus speak on some of his collections. And at that time, he was speaking about his illuminated manuscripts and miniature books that he had sold. Do you have any knowledge of that?
Well, that was not part of the store's collection, so I can't really comment on that. I mean, I know it was very vast, and I know it was a collection that certainly held a great deal of meaning to him, but I don't know much about those pieces since they weren't part of the corporate collection. Yes, my office is in downtown. Sure.
What happened to the Matisses that used to be in the ladies' room on the second floor of the downtown store?
We still have them, and they are in another location downtown. They're in another location downtown. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Well, those are in the executive offices.
Julie, thank you very, very much for being with us tonight. I think that everyone would agree with me that Neiman Marcus is very lucky that you are the steward of this most remarkable collection. And I think that we're all very lucky that Neiman Marcus is such a remarkable corporate citizen in supporting the arts the way that they do. And I want to thank you and Neiman Marcus for everything that you've done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I know that next month when I'm in Beverly Hills opening Heritage's new gallery, that I'm going to sneak away for part of one afternoon and go over and have a look at that amazing Alexander Calder and Jean Dubuffet and all of the other great art that you have in that store. Thank you so much. For those of you who will be able to join us next month for Second Tuesdays at Slocum, and for those of you from around the world who are able to join us watching online, our speaker is going to be Mark Pendergast. Mark is the Director of Trust and Estates for Heritage's Houston, Texas office, and he's going to speak on the valuation of art and collectibles in today's economy, which is different from 18 months ago's economy. So Mark Pendergast is a great expert, and we look forward to having you all back either online or here in person in Dallas with us on the second Tuesday of February. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We appreciate your support and your attendance. Good night.